Minister, my position on the issue of housing those seeking international protection and those fleeing Ukraine has been absolutely consistent, and that is that in responding to an international crisis, we must not create a domestic crisis. This is clearly what is happening, unfortunately, in relation to the accommodation of applicants in a vast number of hotels and B&Bs throughout this state. I'm seeking your views on this particular matter and also the level of engagement that you have had with the representative bodies from the tourism sector.
Thanks, Deputy. And I'm very cognizant of the potential impact on the tourism industry arising from the number of contracts my department has entered into to meet our responsibilities to provide accommodation to beneficiaries of the Temporary Protection Directive and international protection. Regular meetings take place between my officials and the relevant department and Fáilte Ireland to share learnings, to discuss ideas as we continue to respond to the challenge of procuring enough accommodation to meet demand. My department is really grateful to the support of those in this sector in responding to date to the unprecedented challenges. You know, the tourism sector have been magnificent in terms of the support they've offered, and communities, of course, across the country have welcomed those from Ukraine during this time of need. My department is very aware of the concerns shared by some of these communities about the absence of tourism in some areas and now into the future, and the consequent impact on local spending. To respond to these and other issues, we continue to work alongside both Fáilte Ireland and the Department of Tourism as part of the whole of government response, and ensuring that key stakeholders have a place in terms of the senior officials group and are able to engage with us in terms of our accommodation solutions. Government, as you know, is committed to delivering accommodation solutions beyond service accommodation, including refurbished building strands, the forthcoming new vacant homes call, the delivery of modular accommodation. But of course, and you referenced it yourself, we have to recognise that all of this is happening in the context of war in Europe, the biggest humanitarian challenge that Europe has faced since the Second World War, the biggest humanitarian challenge our country has ever faced. And we have to just recognise that even though it mightn't be top billing on the news every night, 6,500 civilians dead in Ukraine, tens of thousands of soldiers dead in Ukraine, 400 children dead in Ukraine. That is why we're experiencing these difficulties, and we should always just bear that in mind in terms of our discussions of these issues.
Minister, rather than potential issues happening, these are real issues that are already becoming a crisis. I mean, you know, the 76% of hotels are being used, and yesterday the Irish Times reported on a report by the Irish Tourism Industry Confederation, and that report states that the tourism industry is warning of a potential $1 billion cost if refugee numbers in hotels and B&Bs continue to rise. It was also reported that industry will call on government to reduce the 12 to 15%, the proportion of tourism accommodation being used to house refugees from the Ukraine and elsewhere. Has that call been made? And if so, has it been communicated to your department? You have said that there was engagement, so I'd like to know if that has happened there, the call. This is an absolute crisis. Real issues are there already, not potential issues, real issues. One of the most, if not the most important economic sectors is being radically undermined by the wholesale takeover of hotels. The report also noted, as reported by the Irish Times, that the Republic is an outlier in Europe in relation to its depth of reliance on tourism beds for refugees, and warns that reduced capacity for tourists is damaging the industry. Currently, it says almost 22% of tourism accommodation is used by the state for refugees from Ukraine and elsewhere. The Irish Tourism Industry Confederation wants this cut to 12 to 15%. Would you be in favour of that? Because that is a proportionate response, and it is a fair response, Minister. There are limitations to everything, unfortunately.
Thanks. Just, Deputy, I think at the start of your contribution you said 75%, and just it's 22, 23% of hotel beds are used for Ukraine at the moment. So
what report is that from?
That's from that's the figures that we get from Tourism Ireland, that it's 22, 23%. It's not 75%.
But in all tourist facilities, the figure that I have is 76%, and that relates to all tourist facilities, which would be hotels and B&Bs.
That we have 70.
And guest
No,
house.
that's not accurate.
That's fine. No, thanks. I'm sorry. I just wanted to.
You're right. It's good that we're clear on these things. Look, there is a challenge for the tourism industry here. I absolutely understand it. We are looking to diversify where we are accommodating Ukrainian displaced persons. That's why we're bringing on modular, that's why we're bringing on vacant homes, that's why we're bringing on the refurbishment of homes. So that will operate to support the diversification and the move away from the reliance on hotel accommodation, and that work is ongoing at the moment. But again, and I just think it is important to remember, the reason that this pressure is being put on the tourism sector and indeed in other sectors is that women and children are dying in Ukraine on a daily basis, and all over Europe there is pressure happening as a result of this war. Thanks, Deputy.
Minister, in relation to the figure I gave you there, 76% of all Ukrainian refugees are being accommodated in tourist facilities. That figure was supplied by the Irish Hotels Federation, ITIC, and that's the figure I got, the Irish Tourism Industry Confederation. That's the figures that they apparently supplied. But in relation to the overall point, I mean, do you think it's right that come March, the hotel beds and guest accommodation and everything else is going to be needed? So then we have a situation where we could have more people, and more than likely we'll have more people homeless. Now, you're talking about helping people, but I don't think you're helping them if they're going to end up with absolutely nowhere come March. That's not helping people. So, well and good, you can give the political rhetoric and the message about helping, and I'm all for helping, by the way. But we are being overrun. The figure is expected to rise to 70,000 refugees by winter. Where are they all going to go? I think we need to get real here. We need to get real. We're all compassionate people here, but we need to get real, and there needs to be a sense of proportion and a reasonable response that doesn't create a crisis, and there is a crisis in the making here, Minister.
Thanks very much, Deputy. I suppose you ask, it is indicative of the real fears that Ukrainians have that they will make this journey here, irrespective of the uncertainty in terms of the accommodation situation that they will have when they arrive here. But it is indicative of their fears for themselves and their families that they do so because they are in a wartime situation. There are missiles falling on civilian targets all over Ukraine, and that is why people come here, and that's why people choose, even if they ended up in tented accommodation in Gormanstown or, sometimes sleeping on camp beds, they still see that as a preferable choice, and we just have to bear that in mind. In terms of that figure, I thought you were saying 75% of all hotel beds were being used. So apologies, I misinterpreted what you said there. Apologies for that. But as I said, the figure in terms of the total number of hotel beds is 22, 23%. There is pressure here. Undoubtedly there's pressure, as there is in other parts of society, but there is pressure on every European country, Deputy, right now, and that is President Putin, Vladimir Putin, is using refugees as one of the weapons in his war to try and unsettle us, to try and undermine support for Ukraine, and I don't think we can allow him win in that context.